We know from Cairnholy that the settlement of Galloway began as long ago as 6,000 years. Those people would probably have been hunter-gatherers, and they would have used the rivers to navigate into Galloway's interior and, over time, would have made their way far up into the hills of the upper Glenkens, leaving behind fragments of flint arrows and tools in the places where they made their regular camps. Some places, due to good geographic location, became more permanently settled in time. Farms and forts sprang up as the population increased, and by the Iron Age the rivers brought trade and sometimes war to the settlers in Galloway. Increasing status and the growing need for security led to fortified settlements to keep out hostiles and impress locals. By the time the Romans were building their camp at Glenlocher, trade would have been flowing up and down the River Ken into the Glenkens between the folk that lived in places like Carlingworks Brochs and the settled peoples up here in the Rins of Kells. St Ninian's arrival may have brought Christianity to the coast, but the growing population of people who were drawn to Whithorn would still have had trade with the wild, possibly heathen folk up in the hills of Galloway for the resources found around here. Christianity filled up the space left by the Romans, but people lived in much the same way for many centuries still, until medieval times and the arrival of the Normans at the request of David I. Now, with all of that in mind, we're at Stroanfreggan near Carsphairn, which is the site of an Iron Age fort. AOC Archaeology, in association with Carsphairn Heritage Initiative, are currently undertaking an archaeological dig with the help of local volunteers as well, and have agreed to show us around. So let's head up the hill and take a look at the dig.
Hi, I'm Cathy McKeever from AOC Archaeology, and we're working here today with Carsphairn Heritage Initiative to investigate the hill fort at Stroanfreggan. So we'll sort of do a tour of the site, talk through the different features that we're finding and any new results we have from the digging as well.
Excellent. Okay, let's go.
Cool. So this is one of our first trenches that we opened. We've got 4 weeks to investigate the site up here on the fort, and one of our main priorities is trying to understand the enclosing features around the hill fort. So hill forts are generally something that sort of have enclosures, walls or banks or ditches around a hilltop. It's not always the highest hill, and in the case of Stroanfreggan it's actually a more prominent lower hill which is more visible from the surrounding area. And what would have been very visible is the scale of this wall that we've uncovered. So there's a huge amount of stone tumble on the site from the wall collapsing, but underneath that, once we removed the tumble, we were able to sort of show a nice boulder curb on the inside here, and then 4 meters away we have another line of boulders which revets the internal wall core material, and the wall core is comprised of these much smaller shattered stones. One of the most interesting things from digging, which is entirely new information, is not just the scale of the structure here, which we could have probably assumed from the amount of tumbled stone on the site, but also the fact that we think in places at least the wall has undergone some form of vitrification. And the vitrification is something you see on lots of other sites across Scotland, on both Iron Age and early medieval sites, and it's something that happens when you have areas of walling that have timber lacing or timber buildings up against the wall. Fires created, presumably a very deliberate act because it would have needed sort of stoked over a period of time. And if you can reach temperatures of about 1,000 degrees Celsius over a sustained period of time, the rock itself actually starts to melt and drip and fuse together. So that's really interesting that we can actually say for a fact that there's some form of vitrification has happened on the site, and it would also imply that there's probably a timber lacing component to how this structure is pulled together. So what we see here is just the foundation, the lower metre of what was once probably a wall that could have been up to 2-3 metres high potentially, and certainly 4 metres wide at the base. So a really substantial construction.
That is quite a meaty beast of a wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you'd be wanting to keep people out if you had such strong walls. So
yeah, it's definitely acting as an enclosing feature. There's a probable entrance, but there appears to only be the one entrance. So it's something that would have controlled access and movement to the site. And there's lots of different reasons for that, lots of different theories about why hill forts are the way they are. It's certainly a security measure. It's stopping animals and strangers from wandering in casually. It's maybe containing your own livestock in a safe place at the top of a hill. And it's also probably a status symbol. So you probably don't need a 4 metre wide big stone wall to keep out strangers or to keep out small groups of sort of aggressive people. So it's as much probably about the status as it is about the actual physical barrier. Yeah,
basically implying this is quite a high status.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really substantial. It's very visible from a distance, which is probably also why it's located here on the lower spur of the ridge, which is much more prominent to the people in the valley below moving up and down the water of Ken. And it's also sort of a way of saying very clearly, I have control of this area, I have control of the population, we have enough resources, enough surplus to take time away from farming, hunting, fishing, foraging, and actually construct something of this scale. So it's a very visible feature, which is interesting. So we think that that's probably enclosing this area, marking it out as a high status settlement. With the digging so far, we haven't come across remains of buildings, but there presumably would have been at least a couple of buildings inside, as well as potentially smaller structures for workshops, craft working, things like that. But because a lot of our focus has been on the structural components, we haven't really uncovered much evidence of small buildings yet anyway. So yeah.
Where would you like to take us next?
So we'll head up to our annex enclosure, which is just over here.
Old place names teach us a great deal about the places they name. A lot of the place names in the Glenkens, although not all of course, are derived from Gaelic. The hill of Dundeuch, for example, tells us that the hill once had a fort on it too. Dundeuch means the fort of the Duch, which is the river that runs around the foot of the hill. Stroanfreggan also derives its name from Gaelic. Stroanfreggan, which means a promontory of rocks. It's a very apt name, as you can see, and of course the rocks it refers to are the rocks that once made up the walls of the fort that stood here.
So the area we've just come through is a break in the rampart. Whether that's been caused by the robbing of stone later from the collapsed walls, or whether it was originally a gap, is hard to say until we excavate something around it. But it's the most likely entranceway on the site, with people coming up round the hill and then coming up a much more gradual gradient where you could get stock up here, you could get animals, pack horses, and potentially small carts bringing in materials to the site. And then behind me here we have the smaller scale wall, which is enclosing this sort of flat area of this terrace, which is on the outside of the main fort. So we're calling this an annex enclosure, for lack of a better phrase at the moment, but it's enclosing a little bit more of this flat spur on the ridge, presumably for a slightly different activity than what's happening in the main summit enclosure. So we might have people living, working, crafting in the main area. There might be something else going on here, like a workshop or a different type of activity, or it might be for livestock. But the scale of the wall here is significantly smaller. It's about 2.5 meters wide at most, and it's defined by upright set stones rather than coursed rubble. So a little bit less substantial. But the upright stones create quite a nice visual effect. If you're approaching the site from the ridge, it gives you a sense of multiple walls as you approach. So again, it feeds into that idea of it looking impressive. Yeah. And the boulders on this side are much larger than the ones on the inside. So it's again pointing towards it being about impressing to people coming in rather than looking nice for the people who are already inside it. Yeah.
Could this be a later addition as well?
It's later in some form. We can tell that it's tagged on to the original enclosure, but whether it's later by a couple of days or 1,000 years is hard to say till we can get the dating evidence.
And there's no vitrification in there?
There's no vitrification in this, so it doesn't appear to have had a timber lacing component, or if it did, it's eroded away rather than burnt down. But on the inside here we can see just bits of bedrock starting to show up. So the original parent rock of the hill is there, not far below the surface, but it's relatively flat in places, and then the undulations in between have been filled with stone, we think, to level it a little bit. So creating a very rough surface for the activities in here. And the important thing is, although the deposits are very shallow, we have got a kind of critical occupation layer. So beneath the turf, you're probably into something that could be, up to 2,000 years old potentially. But there's charcoal flecks through that. It abuts the inside of the wall, so we know that it postdates, the formation of that deposit postdates the construction of the wall. So ideally we get some charcoal from the base of the wall. We can say the date after which the wall was built. We get some charcoal from up against the wall. We can say the date after which it's been occupied, and or maybe the last activity on the site.
It's a really good indicator.
Yeah, absolutely. It should give us, we hope with the charcoal we're finding, the wood charcoal, that we'll be able to get a number of radiocarbon dates to date the activity on the site. And it'll be range finding dates where we're getting a sense of when activity's happening, maybe rather than dating explicitly when the construction was. But if we have enough of those and enough successful results, then we'll be able to say a lot more about the period upon which the fort's used. It could be a single phase with different components, or we might discover that there's actually multiple phases of activity. And at the moment, I'd say the best guess is probably that it's an Iron Age site. The majority of hill forts in Scotland that have been excavated and dated securely do date to the Iron Age. You have some that predate it, coming from the late Bronze Age, and you have a small number as well that appear to be either reused or created in the early medieval period. And there's some notable examples in Dumfries and Galloway, like Trustees Hill, Mota Mark, and there's thought to be early medieval activity at Tinrondoon, which is relatively close to here. So there's a potential for that on this site, but at the moment we haven't got the dating to push that agenda.
Finding your way then.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd say at the moment that there's certainly a prehistoric origin to it, based on similarities with other prehistoric sites. The substantial nature of the 4-metre wide wall, and the fact that there actually aren't very many artefacts is quite a common occurrence on a lot of Iron Age prehistoric sites.
Because
so
people living there for so long, and people moving in and moving out.
Potentially, and clearing out when they go. So they're taking a lot of the material that we would find very useful to date stuff and reusing it, recycling it elsewhere. So
absolutely. That's fascinating.
Okay, cool. So I think probably makes sense to go back down to the Boggy Hollow. So I think from about here you get quite a good view of this gully that runs across the site. So it's a natural gully that would have created a sort of a natural channel for water runoff from the site. So anytime it rains, a lot of the water is collecting in this gully and then running off the side of the hill. But our question here is, there's an area of reeds where it's obviously staying quite boggy throughout the summer. So we have sort of two questions. One is that just natural water retention, and it would have been a useful thing for people on site to take advantage of? Or is it that actually the gully has maybe been augmented in some way? Maybe it's been quarried a bit deeper. It could have been lined with clay or something that would just help with retaining water, and that would give you some water available on site, at least during the rainy period, rather than having to go all the way to the Water of Ken to get your sort of water supply. We haven't progressed the trench that well at the moment because it was very wet for us last week, but what we can say with confidence is that it is retaining water, so it's not immediately all draining off the hill. And what we'll do in the next few days with some dry conditions is investigate that a bit further. Our second objective is to understand how any sort of, if we do find nice waterlogged deposits, are they remaining waterlogged throughout all the seasons? We had a very dry summer this year, and when we arrived on site before any substantial rainfall, it was still very damp in there. So we can probably say with a level of confidence that any deposits right at the base remain damp throughout the year. And that's good news in terms of archaeological survival. If there are organic remains, textile, wood, anything else that would normally sort of degrade away in an acidic soil on top of a hill might be preserved better there. So we can hopefully, with a bit of excavation here, inform not just the use of the site, but also the kind of continuing survival of deposits. So we're working quite closely with, because the site is a scheduled monument, we work closely with Historic Environment Scotland to ensure that we're sort of following all of our project design research objectives. And one of the things that this will hopefully be useful for Historic Environment Scotland in the future management of the site is knowing if these deposits are maybe under threat, if the site is starting to slowly dry out as we have sort of drier summers. So that's something that we kind of look to do whenever we're doing a research investigation. We're understanding the site and the date and what people did and occupied the site with, what activities happened, but we're also trying to ensure that the future management of it is as well informed as possible.
It remains well preserved
for the future. Exactly, And that's something to say as well, that we're doing 4 quite small trenches. In the scheme of the scale of the site, they're giving us a taste of what's happening on the site, but they're by no means aiming to be comprehensive. They're just evaluating what's here, characterising things, and informing what happens next. So so a lot of this site remains untouched, with the idea that in 10 years or 20 years maybe there's a new scientific technique that could be applied here that we don't have access to just now. So that's sort of part of it as well.
So it's an ongoing work.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a beautiful site. I mean, you can see why you would build here, because you've got such wide views. And
Absolutely.
the waterways as well.
Yeah.
People travelled much more by water than by land. Because it was easier.
Yeah. And if you're moving up and down north to south, you're going to be following the route of the water of Ken.
Yes.
It's the easiest place to sort of move livestock as well, if you're staying on the slopes of the hill and the drier ground as well. And back in the Iron Age, the grinder line around here would have been a lot better drained than what we see now, because with various sort of like changes in land use, things like more commercial forestry, it not being farmed in the same way, that's all shifted the drainage patterns and stuff. So
you would have had a lot more cattle on this land. A lot less sheep
absolutely.
Like that, so that would change the course of the river. I'm sure the river has actually changed course quite a lot, because you can see that the ground's very soft around there. There's been
a change in the meanders at points as well. But it would have been a natural through route from the earliest periods of prehistory, really. As soon as you're into that sort of post-glacial period, into things like, we know there's Mesolithic activity, so sort of Middle Stone Age deposits, things like flint scatters eroding out of the banks of the water of Ken in the local area. So it's where hunter-gatherers are moving up and down north to south as well.
So they're navigating using the river and following the herds, no doubt, as well.
Yeah, exactly. We've actually identified a couple of fragments of lithic or stone material that they definitely date to an earlier period of prehistory than the fort itself. So it's showing some group using the hilltop prior to there ever being a fort here.
So we can take away a great deal from today's tour. The people that populated Stroanfreggan likely did over a long time, beginning maybe as far back as the Mesolithic era, with hunter-gatherers who would have used the Ken to navigate up and down to the Solway. By the Iron Age, a settlement was very likely in place here, with impressive fortified walls and a great command of the surrounding ground from its point on the ridge. The fields then would have been less boggy and more suitable for crops, although livestock would also have been kept and secured at night behind those thick walls. People probably continued to live here right up into the early medieval period, between 1500 and 1000 years ago. But it's likely that by the time the Normans arrived, it was no longer used. Much of the structure, including those thick walls, would have been scavenged for building in subsequent years, just like the outer stones of Cairnholy. There may well be stones in the dykes and farmhouses of the upper Glenkens that were made from those walls now. It really is incredible to think of just how long people have lived in our wee corner of the world. Generation after generation, with new waves of incomers like the Romans, the Vikings, the Britons, the Gaels and the Normans, each bringing new ideas and new ways, that we can now trace these countless lives that have come before us with dedication and science is equally incredible. We have come so far and learned so much since folk first settled here, maybe thousands of years ago. But it's places like Stroanfreggan that show us that there is still so much yet to uncover.